Are we really back at this point once again? Unfortunately, yes, and this time the evidence is even more concerning. What unfolded at Gamebridge Fieldhouse on Saturday night was far more than a simple defeat. It wasn't merely a cold shooting performance from a team that remained fundamentally sound. Instead, it was a complete organizational breakdown on multiple levels, resulting in a decisive 16-point loss to Portland franchise that had not even existed in regular season WNBA competition before 2026. Every weakness was exposed. The stagnant offense, the failures protecting the paint, questionable rotation choices, and the ongoing concerns surrounding injury communication that have followed this team for weeks. All of it was visible throughout the game, reflected in the statistics, and connected to decisions made by the coaching staff before, during, and after key moments. The result was an 84-100 defeat, dropping the team to 4-4 on the season. More importantly, it raised deeper structural concerns that cannot simply be ignored or expected to disappear on their own. To understand the full scope of the situation, accountability must begin where it always does with this team. Caitlin Clark logged just over 21 minutes and finished with 6 points while shooting 1 for 7 from the floor, a success rate of only 14.3%. She missed both of her attempts from beyond the arc, posted a -8 rating, and eventually fouled out. When those numbers are viewed alongside her recent form, the trend becomes difficult to dismiss. Across her last 2 games, Clark has connected on only 4 19 field goal attempts, barely above 20%. Her three-point shooting, which stood at an impressive 44% during a 4-game stretch not long ago, has completely disappeared over her last 2 outings. This decline is no longer a one-game anomaly. It is a developing pattern supported by multiple performances moving in the same direction. At the same time, questions remain about her physical condition, particularly because the coaching staff has not provided the level of transparency that became necessary after the reporting controversy surrounding Portland earlier this month. Clark herself acknowledged that her back can fall out of alignment quickly, describing an issue that sounds ongoing rather than fully resolved. The late scratch before the first Portland matchup, which ultimately led to a formal league warning regarding injury reporting procedures, was attributed to back stiffness. Since then, her reduced playing time and consecutive losses has been clearly documented. Considering the sequence of events, it is reasonable to believe that Stephanie White may be managing Clark's workload with awareness of a physical concern that has not been fully communicated publicly. Based on the available evidence, that conclusion is far from speculative. What becomes much harder to justify, however, is the specific rotation decision that ultimately shaped the most critical stretch of the game.
In a trade, Caitlin Clark was benched in the first quarter of this game. And after that, she started getting in foul trouble, and she was benched throughout the majority of this game. I don't have the energy to even make a video right now. I'm just so mad, guys. Final score 84-100. I am so fucking mad right now.
Stephanie White's decision to take Clark out during the opening quarter immediately became one of the most debated moments of the game. Pulling a player who is already struggling to find her shot, already battling the timing and confidence issues that naturally accompany a shooting slump, and placing her on the bench while the intensity and flow of the game are still being established carries significant consequences. For a scorer trying to regain form, consistency matters. She needs repeated possessions, consecutive reads, multiple touches, and continuous defensive involvement to rediscover the rhythm that leads to efficient decision-making and quality shot creation. Interrupting that process, moving her into a passive spectator role, and then asking her to re-enter against a defense that has had extra time to settle into its coverage strategy can make that recovery even more difficult. Rather than helping rebuild momentum, the sequence risks deepening the disruption. When Clark returned, the night only became more frustrating. She eventually fouled out after being charged with 5 personal fouls, removing her entirely from the game's most important stretch. As a result, the player who serves as the engine of Indiana's offense, the one responsible for generating spacing, creating defensive pressure, and opening opportunities for her teammates, was unavailable when the Fever needed her most. By the time the fourth quarter arrived, Clark was no longer a factor on the floor, and Indiana was left trying to overcome a growing deficit without the centerpiece of a defensive system. In a contest that ended with a 16-point loss, that absence became impossible to ignore.
Saying different things about Caitlin Clark. How can you be in rhythm when the referees call every foul for you just touching a damn basketball? The lineups has been just so horrendous. And I never thought I'd be saying this, but I wish we had Christy Sides, bro. At this point, it is brutal to watch. Indiana Fever is currently in the final seconds of this basketball game. It is so bad tonight that Stephanie White is actually trending on. She's trending on.
The reaction from fans following Saturday's loss represent a form of feedback that organizations ignore at their own risk. Supporters often provide an early indication of whether confidence in leadership is strengthening or eroding, and right now the message coming from Indiana's fan base is becoming increasingly difficult to overlook. These are the same fans who remained patient through years of rebuilding, continued showing up, and invested heavily in the team despite long stretches of frustration. Now, a growing portion of that community is expressing something that would have seemed unlikely not long ago: nostalgia for the previous coaching staff they once criticized and wanted removed. When supporters begin looking back at a former regime more favorably than the current one, it signals that trust in the present leadership has suffered significant damage. At that point, explanations, post-game comments, and carefully crafted messaging lose much of their effectiveness. Credibility can only be restored through tangible improvement and consistent results on the court. Unfortunately for Indiana, Saturday's performance pushed the conversation in the opposite direction. Rather than providing evidence that the team is moving forward, the loss intensified concerns about the direction of the franchise and the decisions being made along the way. Beyond the offensive struggles and rotation questions, another major issue demands closer examination: the team's inability to protect the interior. The defensive performance around the basket was not simply a weakness. It became a defining factor in how the game unfolded and deserves its own detailed review.
The Portland Fire has made 52 points in the paint. 52 points in the paint. They're literally picking the Indiana Fever apart. They have no bigs. The entire front office needs to be fired today. Amber Cox.
Portland's dominance inside the paint was one of the clearest indicators of how the game slipped away from Indiana. The Fire finished with 52 points near the basket, an enormous total against a Fever team whose defensive structure is built around Aaliyah Boston serving as the anchor in the middle. As the team's primary rim protector and interior presence, Boston is expected to be a key part of limiting those opportunities. Yet she ended the night with a -14 rating, the lowest figure among Indiana starters and one of the most concerning statistical outcomes of the game. While individual players always carry responsibility for their performance, numbers of this magnitude rarely exist in a vacuum. The more important question is why Boston repeatedly found herself in situations where Portland could attack successfully around the rim. Defensive systems are not created on the fly by players. They are established, organized, and adjusted by the coaching staff. Players operate within the framework they are given, while coaches determine the coverages, rotations, and strategic responses to opposing offensive actions. When an opponent scores 52 points in the paint and consistently finds advantages against the centerpiece of your interior defense, the issue extends beyond a single player's execution. In a game that ultimately ended in a 16-point defeat, those breakdowns point toward larger structural problems within the defensive game plan itself. The result was not simply an isolated failure by one defender. It reflected a system that struggled to contain Portland's attack and failed to make the necessary adjustments as the game unfolded. That makes the outcome as much a coaching concern as a player performance issue.
Lexi Hall was horrendous tonight. And I hate to say that for Lexi, man. Lexi was awful front of field, awful from three. And once again, the Indiana Fever has no-name players getting... Who the fuck is Megan Gustafsson? She had 22 points. She couldn't miss. Megan couldn't miss. 8-8 from the field. One-on-one. She shot 100%, bro. She missed one free throw. Megan did. I don't even know who Megan is.
Megan Gustafson delivered one of the most efficient performances of the night, finishing with 22 points while converting an astonishing 88% of her field goal attempts. Gustafson has built a solid professional career and is unquestionably a capable contributor, but performances at that level of efficiency rarely happen against a well-organized and properly functioning defense. The defensive mistakes that allowed those numbers were not hidden. They appeared repeatedly throughout the game film. Portland consistently found ways to get Gustafson the ball in favorable positions, and Indiana struggled to disrupt those opportunities. The Fever failed to take away her preferred receiving spots, failed to challenge her most comfortable scoring angles, and failed to adjust after it became clear how effective she was becoming. When a player is shooting at an elite rate early in a game, immediate defensive changes are usually required to force tougher decisions and lower percentage attempts. Those adjustments never seem to arrive with enough consistency. As a result, Gustafson continued operating with a level of comfort that professional defenses simply cannot afford to allow. The analytical takeaway is not that she suddenly transformed into an unstoppable offensive force for one night. Rather, the more reasonable conclusion is that Indiana's defensive structure failed to create the degree of resistance that high-level competition demands. When an opposing player approaches near-perfect efficiency across an entire game, it typically reflects not only individual execution, but also a defense that failed to increase pressure, alter matchups, or make the strategic corrections necessary to raise the difficulty of every possession.
And Steph White are both trending. Fever fans want her to be left behind in Portland. Stephanie White coaching is criminal. Let's just pull up the latest, bro. Let's just pull up the latest. Fire Stephanie White and Amber Cox. This next week. The experiment is over. It's definitely over. Cannot believe what the front office plus Stephanie White plus her atrocious coaching staff has done to once-in-a-lifetime player in Kayla Clark and Kelsey Mitchell-Leah Boston. Plus, this is...
The current situation demands a clear-eyed evaluation without minimizing concerns that have emerged. Indiana sits at 4-4 after dropping 4 of its last 5 games, following a promising 3-1 start. At the same time, Caitlin Clark's shooting struggles have extended across multiple contests, with her converting just 21% of her field goal attempts during that stretch. Defensively, the issues are equally concerning. The Fever recently surrendered 52 points in the paint to a first-year expansion franchise, exposing weaknesses in a defensive structure that was expected to be one of the team's strengths. Meanwhile, Saturday's rotation decisions removed the team's most important offensive initiator during a critical stage of the game and left her unable to influence the outcome when the contest slipped away. More importantly, many of the concerns identified early in the season remain unresolved. Questions surrounding secondary playmaking, inconsistent pick-and-roll utilization, and the challenge of balancing Clark's natural strengths within Stephanie White's offensive system continue to surface game after game. Those existing concerns have now been joined by growing uncertainty surrounding Clark's physical condition, an issue that has not been fully clarified through public communication. Looking ahead, the schedule offers little opportunity for a struggling team to slowly find answers. Every game increases the pressure, and the margin for continued inconsistency grows smaller with each result. The most pressing concern remains Clark's health. If her back condition is affecting her shooting mechanics, release point, balance, or ability to generate power from her lower body, those factors would naturally influence her overall effectiveness. If such limitations exist, they are issues the organization's medical and coaching staff will be evaluating closely. Given the previous reporting controversy involving her availability, transparency surrounding her status has become an important topic of discussion. When reduced playing time, recurring comments about her back, and a noticeable decline in shooting performance all appear simultaneously, it is understandable why questions continue to grow. Many supporters are now looking for direct answers rather than broad reassurances. Another development worth noting is the emergence of trade discussions among portions of the fan base. That conversation is not significant because it necessarily reflects the correct solution, but because of what it reveals about the current level of trust between the organization and its supporters. Players with Clark's level of star power rarely become the subject of trade speculation from their own fans as early in a season unless deeper concerns about team direction and leadership already exist. Whether those concerns are ultimately justified remains open for debate, but their existence is undeniably part of the current landscape surrounding the franchise. The central question moving forward is straightforward. Can Indiana identify and correct these problems before they become more deeply embedded in the season? That is the issue that matters most right now. Be sure to subscribe for more WNBA analysis and upcoming film room breakdowns covering the Fever's defensive challenges, rotation decisions, and any new developments regarding Clark's status. Share your thoughts below. Was Saturday's performance simply a temporary slump from a team capable of adjusting, or does a combination of a .500 record, defensive breakdowns, and Clark's recent shooting struggles point to a larger structural issue that cannot be fixed through lineup changes alone? Every thoughtful basketball perspective adds value to the discussion. We'll see you in the next one.